I'm going to go through first, again, just some setup stuff, literally working from feet to hips to spine to kind of rib cage, obviously related to spine position, what we're doing with shoulder blades, you know, figuring out arm path, and then from there, actually some execution of it. So there's a little bit to unpack here, but I think worth digging into. You want to do this so really you're setting your pelvis in place. And that's just what I did. Now, literally it's the tissue of my butt, my glutes and all sorts of stuff, sliding back and kind of locking in stone. And that's really what I want to have happen. So basically find your comfortable foot stance. Don't need to overthink it. Doesn't need to be a specific width. For me, I always feel a little bit more comfortable wide. And then when you're in, actually slightly drive your feet forward into the ground until you feel your pelvis locked in a nice stable position. Now, in the powerlifting world, sometimes they will actually talk about using leg drive, where depending on how you press the bar, it's not just an upward motion, but it's more this kind of J press, where it will start lower down on your chest or your torso and finish up closer to above your face. And so obviously imagine me laying down and the bar path not just going straight up, but a little bit of this way. I'll actually just lay down. Why imagine? So as I'm laying down, if I want the bar to not only go this way, but a little bit this way, some people can actually time their leg drive, again, pushing themselves up as they press, and actually use that a little bit to get the bar moving up and in this direction. So that's, again, if you hear leg drive and things like that in the powerlifting world, that's a very condensed Cliff Note versions of what some people are talking about. In general, I'm not a fan of that for our purposes, for bodybuilding, for getting big, but I just kind of wanted to cover it. From there, moving from our pelvis and into our spine, for the most part, again, there's going to be exceptions, most people will do better in a more extended spine position, right? So again, as opposed to lying on the bench and having your bench, your entire lower back, lumbar back, and everything flat on the bench, that would actually be most people, this is kind of neutral, where there's a slight arch in lower back. That would be actually a slightly spinal flex position. So most people, that won't be the best position to be in, and that will put your rib cage actually down a little bit. Obviously, so when you spinal flex, you know, the bottom of your ribs will go closer to the top of your pelvis and will actually pull your ribs down. Most people, if pecs are the goal, the more extended you are, the better advantage they're going to have to work to a certain degree. So again, if you extend and say, well, where's my end range? I probably wouldn't go all the way there. There's definitely something to some positions there. You can get to the point where it kind of pinches your shoulder blades a little bit harder into the bench. Still not always a bad thing. But for most people, I would say kind of find somewhere in the middle. So if this is your neutral, extend a little bit, and that's probably going to be a good position for most people. Again, if for no other reason, just to get more pec fibers in the plane you're moving. As I sit here, this is where my pec fibers lay. Obviously, if I'm bench pressing, I'm moving this way. If I can get more pec fibers in that same plane, so if I get some of these pec fibers more vertical, so again, we might as well show while I'm laying down. So again, as I lay kind of flat, pec fibers are kind of flat. As I extend, pec fibers get a little bit more vertical. So especially kind of the mid to lower pec fibers, I can get more of those in plane to pull my upper arm across and in turn, move that bar up and down. So again, find your comfy spot. Doesn't have to be an exact amount, mess around with a little bit, but a little bit of extension here. The next thing that people always ask is, what do I do with my shoulder blades? I don't think there's a definitive answer here. I don't think it's all bad if your shoulder blades stay still the whole time, depending on the range of motion you choose. So if some bodybuilders stay a little bit more in this bottom position, as you can see, my upper arm might be moving through 30, 40 degrees of range of motion. I think that can be fine. Your shoulder blades don't have to move a lot. If you're going through more range of motion, that upper arm is coming up across higher, just literally as you go like this in space, keeping everything tight, you might feel your shoulder blades want to move. If they want to move a little bit, let them move. Everyone should have their shoulder blades pulled together at the bottom. So as you go into the eccentric, I always say, just feel like you're rowing into the bottom. So literally, if I was rowing with a cable here and grabbing at a bar and trying to pull back, I would pinch my shoulder blades together. That is how you want to always start the bottom, the concentric portion, or end the eccentric portion of the bench. So shoulder blades together. And then as you press, just keep everything tight. Keep the majority of your focus on your pecs contracting as hard as you can. And the shoulder blades are just gonna go where they go. So again, shorter range of motion. They stay pretty still, no big deal. If you're coming up a little bit higher and you feel that they wanna move, just let them move. Again, as long as your main focus is on the pecs. The last thing to cover before I kind of actually get in and show Last two things to cover is going to be arm path and what range of motion you're actually bringing the bar down to. So for most people, the arm path here, you're going to have kind of a slot, which is fine, which is maybe a 30 to 40 degree window, which is going to be good if the goal is pec development. So again, a lot of people talk about this high elbow position, and then basically that it's not a good thing for your shoulders, which at some range is true. If you go through enough abduction, eventually you're going to get to a point where it feels kind of pinchy and trappy. That depends a little bit on the shape of your acromion, the top of your scapula, and how that humerus sits under there. So there is some individuality there. You'll find some people that can be in this high elbow position and be perfectly fine, zero pain, comfortable, do it for decades, no issues. But in general, the higher you go, the more likely you are to get pinchy. So for most people, if this is the high elbow position, just drop it down 5 to 10 degrees. That's one end I think would be good. And then you could even go as tucked as low as this, I think would be good. And so again, the only issue is if you tuck down too low, eventually that upper arm path does not line up with any pec fibers. Even tucked in right here, it might catch a couple of these fibers that attach to the clavicle, maybe, but it's really just putting your front delt in a position. So mess around with it. It's not one size fits all. So again, if this is high elbow, start here. So I think here can be a fine position. I think here can be a fine position, and everywhere in between. So mess around with that. Find your arm path. Once you find your arm path, then determine what your depth should be. How low should you bring the bar? So again, I think this works really well if you got a broomstick or something, but say this is gonna be my arm path, I grab it, same thing, practice like you're gonna row into the bottom. So actively drive your elbows as far back as you can. So you're actively going back, not just like, oh, there's the end. No, try and drive them back, squeeze like you're rowing. Wherever your hands end up, that's a pretty good range of motion. So you see from me, I can pretty comfortably get right to my chest, depending on the day, maybe half an inch off my chest. So again, that's the best way to gauge, because some people will do this and say, oh, this is all my shoulders allow, stopping 6 inches off the chest, and they're not even actively trying to pull back. Where some people will actively pull back as hard as they can. You know, they can only get an inch off. They'll just put a ton of weight on the bar and let it smash down and in, which arguably wouldn't be very good either. So again, once we've done all that, the last thing to unpack is basically what we're gonna do as far as grip goes. So again, determine your arm path. So again, if I want my elbows out here, then basically the thing you always want is going to be your hand directly above your elbow. That will ensure the most pec involvement and the least tricep involvement. Or if you actually go wider, maybe it's taking the triceps out of it, but you are gonna actually limit the range of motion, the travel of your upper arm. If you go too close, you could technically actually get a little bit more travel of the upper arm, but you could put the load in a position where it's actually impacting your elbows more and in turn your triceps more. So whenever you go to your bottom, again, we've got the arm path. Okay, I'm gonna bring it down here. Just take your hand basically directly above your elbow. That's where your grip should be. The reason that you always have to mess around with that is if you have a more tucked grip like here, your hands are gonna be closer on the bar. Whereas if your elbows are more flared, your hands are gonna be wider out on the bar. So it's not basically a one size fits all. Then as you're going down, like I said, you've got your position set. So I've got my feet pressed forward, pressing my pelvis in, little arch in the back. As I pull the bar down, I row into the bottom. As you can see, I can comfortably kind of get to my chest. And then as I come to the top, I focus on squeezing my pecs as hard as I can and driving my upper arm across the body. So same as everything else, nice control of the eccentric. If you're worried about bouncing, you can do a pause, hard contraction of the pec across the body. And you can take it all the way to lockout as long as you're focusing on arms across the body. If you're focusing on up, then you can potentially involve your delts or your triceps more. And just so everyone has a visual of that, what I mean is as I'm benching, I try not to think too much about my hands. I think about where my pec actually inserts and bringing this point across my body. So as I come to the finish, I think about bringing my bicep into the side of my pec. And if I do that, I don't have as much force actually going in the direction where my triceps can do as much for lockout. I'm just going until my arms can't come across, can't adduct any further. And that is the end of my range of motion. So just a quickie recap. Take your time finding your feet, push them forward just a little bit, let them set your lower body and your pelvis in place. Most people a little bit of an arch, but mess around with it. I should mention too, whatever position you pick for your torso, keep it still. So again, even though your shoulder blades can move as you press, your spine should never move. So whatever rib position you're in, whether you feel better a little bit more neutral, you feel better a little bit more extended, keep it fixed there the whole time. From there again, as coming to the bottom, really feel like you're rowing into the bottom, pull those shoulder blades together. On the concentric, contract your pecs as hard as you can. The upper arm goes where it goes, the shoulder blades go where it goes. And again, find that arm path. So again, basically the short answer is anywhere from here to here for most people will be pretty good, but mess around with it again. If you really feel fine, that high elbow position, it's not too bad of a thing either. It might just fit your structure. So that is it. It's a bench press tips, and good luck.